Okay. What is the specificity of the archaeological gaze on educational evaluation as governing technology of this projection, as archaeology as a method? Archaeology as a method is a method of detachment, which means it is an attempt to, it is a materialist, an attempt to carry on a materialist analysis, which is concerned with the forms of regularity in government and specifically in truth games, where this, the analysis of the form of regularity is attempted through a systematic description of what Foucault calls discursive formation and their constitutive rules. Here, regularity in truth games has to be intended as regularities has relations and rules. Archaeology is basically focused on the analysis of a systematic description of relation between the elements that Foucault identify as the constitutive of discursive formation, and I will be more precise in a while. Here I have tried, to translate the archaeological method, which is quite complex in the way Foucault presents it, and there are also some shifts across his archaeological works. But basically, I think as a sociologist, as a social researchers, we can identify some clear operations that he does in setting the field of analysis. The first step is, as I said before, to suspend familiar and immediate forms of unity. If you look at the field of educational evaluation, you have, the distinction in different families, disciplines, and theories. These are all unities, that appear to us as familiar and immediate. The archaeological perspective tries to suspend this unity in order to study, what appears as a field in terms of a network of discursive practices. Now, the idea is that to try to describe an enunciative field, a field of statements, what Foucault defined as an open logical space in which discursive practices occur, mapping regularities. Now, what is a discursive practice in the terms of Foucault, in the archaeological perspective? It is not in itself an act of speaking, writing, thinking, calculating, measuring, filtering, concentrating. There is a section of the archaeology where Foucault is quite clear in saying the statement, which is the unity of the archaeological analysis, is something different from a linguistic performance. It's something different from a formulation. It's something different from a proposition, a sentence. And this is quite a big misunderstanding in some ways to apply Foucault as in doing discourse analysis. But discursive practices has to be intended as the local, socio-historical, material condition that enable and constrain disciplinary knowledge practices. It is the local, social, historical, material condition that enable and constrains speaking, writing, thinking, and calculating. I think this is a key step to understand what archaeology can allow us to focus on. Okay, it is what Foucault calls condition of existence. And so, what are these local, social, historical, material conditions? They are relations and rules. Between what? Between, objects, subject position, or what Foucault calls enunciative modalities, between concepts, and thematic choices, what he calls strategies. So, the kind of discursive practices that the archaeology focus on is a way of relating this concrete, local, social, historical, and material ways of relating, put into relation these elements. Okay. And in fact, for instance, when Foucault identified the statement as the focus of the archaeological description, he says, you know, the statement is a modality of existence proper to a group of science. It is not a matter to analyze the group of science in se. It is the problem of analyzing the modality of existence, which means which is the enunciative function which is at work here, you know, in this group of science as they emerge on the surface of history. That means, again, how, you know, this function relates objects, subjective positions, a domain of coordination and coexistence between concepts, and a space in which all of this can be used and repeated and maybe transformed. He is quite clear when he says, you know, which are the strategies to describe a statement. In order to describe a statement, we need to determine the referential of the statement, you know, which means the laws of possibility and the rules of existence for the objects, the subjects, and the concept that are named, designated, described within it. Determine its subjects, which is the particular vacant position, they say, that an individual or a group has to occupy if he or she wants to be the subject of the statement. Okay? Determining the domain of coexistence, which means the space of coexistence and collaterality between the concepts which are mobilized into the statement and a wider domain of concepts, and determining its materiality. Right. And how all of this can be translated in something doable in terms of research. You know? Foucault identifies four processes of formation. The formation of the objects of discourse, and this says, you know, in analyzing the processes of formation of the objects within the discursive formation, which means in an enunciative field made of a relation between statements, we need to focus on the surfaces of emergence, which is the institutional disciplinary field of sphere of social life within which a discursive practice is defining what it's talking about, you know, and give the status on an object. The authorities of the delimitation, those authorities that have the power to delimit, you know, designate or name the objects, and grids of specification, which is systems which enable us to classify, organize, ordering, grouping, deriving objects one from another and make them objects of discourse. A similar kind of argument he makes about the formation of enunciative modalities. You know, and here you have again a sort of specification in terms of analysis of the status, the criteria of competence and knowledge that define, you know, that subject position. You know, a system of differentiation and relation. What according to what system that position is differentiated and put into relation with other positions. Functioning, a number of characteristics that define how that position can function, can operate, you know, in relation to that object, and mobilizing a specific domain of concepts and so on. As you see, both in the case of the process of formation of objects or the process of formation of enunciative modalities, the problem is not in the archaeological perspective to analyze the object in itself. You know, it is not an analysis of the objects of the discourse, but it is an analysis of the kind of rules and relations through which the object is established, or a group of objects is or are established as objects of discourse. And the same is for the enunciative modalities. You see the difference. Foucault does the same with the formation of concepts. You know, in analyzing the formation of concepts, the idea is to identify relational rules in terms of form of successions, how concepts are ordered, forms of coexistence, how and which is the domain of coexistence, the collateral domain of concept in respect to the one that populate the field of presence. That means the concept that emerge in the same field of the statement or the group of statement you are analyzing. The procedure of intervention, how it is possible to rewrite, transcript, approximate, translate, delimit, transferring, systematizing, redistributing concepts or groups of concepts. Okay. And of course, there is the fourth process of formation, which Foucault called the formation of strategies, where the idea is to try to single out which are the rules and the relation through which all the elements, or more precisely, the relation between the elements that we have talked so far on the surface of histories can be related, grouped, put together in terms of thematic choices, in terms of themes, in terms of strategies. You know, and of course, in the third part of the lecture, I will provide you some clear, practical example of what does it mean to analyze educational evaluation as a field of statement, as an enunciative field, using these analytical grids. Okay, so there will be a practical grip after. Just a few minutes of patience about this apparently theoretical and abstract presentation so far. There is one thing that I think is really interesting and offer a clear starting point if you want to apply Foucault archaeology in the suggestion that Foucault gives in the archaeology of knowledge. It is when he says archaeology starts as a raw empiricist attempt of description. There is some irony in this, but you know, Foucault was ironic and a lot. And one of the first move can be to try to organize your analysis depicting what he calls a tree of derivation, or trees of derivation, which means, you know, grasping for regularities within an enunciative field, in attempting to identify governing statements, which means statement which can be how to say, can be, it's difficult to, can be located at a sort of higher level of abstraction or generality, to say it better, which means there are, you know, some statements within an enunciative field that put some rules of transformation, some modality of existence at a more general level than others, you know, and these statements are rare because Foucault looks for laws of rarity, you know, within the dispersion, heterogeneity, and plurality of discourse. And then, you know, it is possible to identify these governing statements and something like the starting point of a tree of derivation, where it is possible to identify procedure of transcription, translation, rewriting of that rules at a more specific level, you know, from the general to the and widely applicable form to the specific form. And Foucault says, what is interesting, and please relate this to my initial problematization of the identification of the constraints and the enablements, or the limits in Foucault terms, that insist on us as educational subjects. Foucault says this is what also makes you understand how is it that some doxological opposition, divergences, alternatives, ruptures, contradiction, harsh debate, you know, at the level of linguistic performance in the scientific domain occur on the surface of histories, but can be related, to some regularities in the relations and rules that define the space of a discursive formation.